Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Wilson Center, where we are congressionally chartered, we're scholarship driven, and we're fiercely nonpartisan and independent. And speaking of scholarship driven, I am proud to welcome to the Wilson Center my friend, Ambassador Clint Williamson. Ambassador Williamson currently serves as lead coordinator of the Atrocity Crimes Advisory Group for Ukraine, a joint effort of the U.S., the United Kingdom, and the EU. He's also Senior Director for International Justice at Georgetown Center on National Security. He previously served as lead prosecutor of the EU's Special Task Force, overseeing the investigation of atrocity crimes committed in the aftermath of the 1999 war in Kosovo. He also served as U.S. Ambassador at Large for War Crimes during the Bush and Obama administration, and he was last with us here in May of 2022. Clint, welcome.
Thank you.
It's great
Pleasure
to
be
see you
here.
again. Great to
Good
see
to
you
see
again.
you as well.
So, describe the work that you do day to day. There's obviously a lot going on. What keeps you busy? What do you focus on?
My responsibilities as lead coordinator tend to be a little bit different from most of our experts who are working in Ukraine. I have a diplomatic and policy role. But the larger part of our operation is really driven by international experts that we are bringing to Ukraine who are working directly with Ukrainian counterparts, primarily prosecutors in the Office of the Prosecutor General, but investigators as well in state security and the national police. The Ukrainians have really strong capabilities in terms of investigating and prosecuting crimes. It's a well-developed system. People are well trained. They don't need help with basic investigative and prosecutorial skills.
To bring up. So when you were last here, we talked about the possible models for prosecuting war crimes.
Yeah.
The ICC, creating a special tribunal, or third, helping Ukraine investigate and prosecute its own court system. And you strongly believed in the third.
Yeah.
Is that still the right model, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is, and frankly, whether I support it or not, I think just by default, that's where we're going to end up. The International Criminal Court, as we all know, has already indicted Vladimir Putin and Maria Lvova-Belova for the abductions of children and their sort of forced Russification. So the ICC will continue to investigate. I'm confident they will deliver more indictments, but still the vast majority of cases are going to have to be dealt with by the Ukrainian system. And as I was saying a moment ago, their basic skills are quite good. Where they need help is in the specialized expertise that relates to investigations and prosecutions of atrocity crimes.
And unfortunately, that's where you have experience.
That's where I have a lot of experience, and most of the experts that we're putting on the ground in Ukraine on an ongoing basis are individuals that have worked in international tribunals or in domestic systems where atrocity crimes have featured prominently, places like Croatia or Bosnia.
Right. Well, and sadly, we have to be able to talk about why this matters. I mean, it would seem obvious to many of us, but quite frankly, with the debate that's going on now, Estonia's president said that you cannot have stable peace without accountability, and that's why we need to do this. Is that your thinking? Why is it that we should support this? Why is it that we should expend resources on it?
I agree completely. And in fact, I mean, most of my career has been centered around that thesis. The Ukrainians have also been adamant that accountability is a key component to an eventual resolution of this conflict. It's not just a matter of attaining a military victory, but President Zelensky and everyone down the chain of command in Ukraine has repeatedly said that the only way they're going to be able to move past this period of conflict is if there are accountability for Russian actions. And I think it is important because this is such an egregious violation of everything that we hold dear. And in fact, if a country is able to engage in this sort of unprovoked aggression against a neighboring state, and not just the aggression itself, but everything that goes with it. And the manner in which they're executing their policies, where mass murder is incorporated in this, forced deportations of huge numbers of people, abductions of children, forced assimilation into Russia.
Targeting civilian infrastructure.
These are just horrible, horrible crimes. And if we don't stand up to it there, if we don't make a stand where a powerful country is doing this, it just gives license to other dictators around the world to engage in the same sort of activity.
So I've also heard Ukrainians put it like this. There was no punishment after Chechnya, no punishment after Georgia or Syria or Crimea. At some point, the world has to say, no, this actually cannot happen.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the danger is that if you do not confront these issues, and I think this is absolutely what happened with Vladimir Putin, is it convinced him that he could act with impunity, that there would not be a reaction to this invasion. People would turn their head, look the other way, as they pretty much did with Georgia, with Crimea, with Syria. And I think he must have been shocked at the reaction that ensued. And I think the commitment that the United States and other governments have shown to seeing this process through.
Yeah. So when you were last here, your trips to the region were infrequent, and now it's all the time. And there seem to be outcomes. Now, what I've seen is that Ukrainian courts have prosecuted more than 30 Russian criminals convicted. That's progress. That's progress.
Yeah. It is progress. The number of cases that have actually gone to trial is very small in the context of how many cases they're with which they're dealing. Right now they have around 100,000 reported cases. Those numbers will come down some because there are clearly duplications in reporting, that sort of thing. But we're still talking tens of thousands of cases. Most of the people that the Ukrainians have in custody are low-level offenders. This might be a conscript soldier who shoots one person. Terrible crime, they should certainly be prosecuted. But the Ukrainians are not able at this point to bring cases against individuals, or to bring to court individuals going up the chain of command. They can bring cases, they can do trials in absentia, but I think they're very mindful of not overusing that and want to utilize that procedure only in very selected cases. But any sort of movement in terms of accountability is helpful for the Ukrainian people, seeing that some justice is being delivered. But this is going to be a very long process, and we're just at the beginning of it.
And in terms of Vladimir Putin himself, he's already been indicted, as we mentioned. And can he be brought to trial in a Ukrainian court?
He cannot. Interestingly, there's this concept in international law which provides, it's called head of state immunity, but it's actually a troika immunity. So it's the head of state, the head of government, and the foreign minister of countries are exempt from prosecution in domestic courts. And this is the case in Ukraine. So really the only venue where Putin can be prosecuted is the International Criminal Court, or ultimately if this special court for the crime of aggression is set up, then he could potentially be indicted and tried there. The reality, I think, which we all recognize, is that it's probably unlikely that Putin is going to physically end up in the dock anytime soon. But we have already seen this impact his behavior. He did not go to the BRICS summit in South Africa.
He's not at the UN.
He's not at the UN. He is not able to engage on the world stage in the fashion that he has been used to doing. I'm sure this is vexing for him, but this is going to be the reality of his life. And all of the member states of the European Union are members of the International Criminal Court. All of them have an obligation to arrest him. So the days of him attending European summits and going to Berlin and Paris and London for meetings, those are over.
Those are over. And so that's the importance of the multiple channels. So the International Criminal Court, again, potential special tribunal, but the work that you're part of. And how much do you think that the work that you're part of and those prosecutions can help to shape the behavior of frontline officers, Russian officers?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's one that's very difficult to answer. We have seen isolated cases, and I've been involved in this type of work in a number of conflicts where you do have situations where military officers, through intercepted communications, things, are talking about concerns of committing crimes. It's hard to say whether that's a moral misgiving that they had from the beginning, or if it has been driven by the fear of being held accountable.
But maybe the accountability at least reinforces the notion that what they're doing is wrong.
Absolutely.
And that there'll be a penalty to be paid.
And we saw this in the wars in the former Yugoslavia, where conduct changed by military forces. I mean, particularly on the Serbian side, because they were involved from the very beginning and at the end. So you had situations where in Kosovo in 1999, Serb forces undertook much more sort of sophisticated measures to hide their crimes than they had in Bosnia or Croatia, not leaving bodies in mass graves, that sort of thing. Hard to say that that's really a deterrent, but clearly it's an indication that these processes were influencing thinking, and that they felt like we at least have to cover up evidence because there is this worry that we might be held accountable. So again, this is also, I think, an evolutionary process. It's going to take a while to get to a point where international justice is universal, but the fact that people are starting to think through this, it is factoring into decision making, is a positive sign.
What are the biggest challenges the Ukrainian courts face, and quite frankly, what the biggest challenges that you face in the work that you're doing?
I think for the Ukrainians, it is just the sheer magnitude of the task they are confronting. This would be an undertaking that would be overwhelming for any prosecutorial service anywhere in the world, including the United States. If all of a sudden you're dealing with cases, this many cases, and for example, in areas outside of Kyiv, when they were liberated, where you have crime scenes that go on for miles and miles, where every dead body has to be treated as an independent investigation and dealt with, and these are these people's neighbors, they're friends. I've been in a lot of these situations, but there was always a level of detachment for me because I was an outsider. But you can imagine having to deal with this where it is in your home community. So I think for the Ukrainians, it's the scale of what's happening, and it is the very personal impact that it is having on prosecutors, and that's tough. I think for us, for others that are engaged there. Well, and I'm sorry, just to follow up on that, I think in the context in which the Ukrainians are operating, the assistance that we're providing is very much focused on not only helping them on a day-to-day basis with the cases they're investigating and prosecuting. And we're there solely in an advisory capacity. We're not investigating for them. And the other part of it is systemic reforms to help them position the Ukrainian institutions to deal with these crimes for years ahead. When you're dealing with this just kind of onslaught of cases and day-to-day crises, it's very hard to step back and do strategic thinking, much less implement strategic plans that need to be put in place. So I think that's the biggest challenge for Ukraine right now.
I was struck by something that the Department of Justice said just a few days ago. They said, look, Ukraine has to fight a war. They have to prosecute those who commit war crimes, and at the same time ensure that a just society comes out the other end of the war. I mean, that's a lot for anyone to do, let alone a country which has received the kinds of bombardment that Ukrainians have done.
It is, and it's not just a war; it's an existential war. I mean, this is not a border skirmish. They are fighting for their survival. They are conducting these investigations and prosecutions as this is ongoing, and the level the extent to which they've been able to do this is really unprecedented. I was on the ground at the Polish-Ukrainian border a week after Russia's invasion. Had my first meeting with counterparts from the Ukrainian Office of the Prosecutor General that day, and they were already at work on these cases within 1 week of the invasion. And at that point, Kyiv was completely surrounded. One of the first pieces of advice I gave them was, you need to start putting contingency plans in place. If Kyiv falls, how are you going to get files out? How are you going to get your key personnel, sensitive witnesses? And their reaction was, we don't need to do that. Kyiv's not going to fall. And this was at a time, I think, where everybody, Western intelligence services, military experts, are saying it's just a matter of days. But it's the spirit that's driven the Ukrainians from the beginning. It hasn't flagged, and it's frankly very inspirational when you work with them.
One of our scholars at Wilson who does work on Europe, she's posed some interesting points. She said, look, when this is all done, and Ukraine hopefully joins the European Union, you're not only going to have Ukraine joining the European Union, but you're going to have the best trained army in Europe, experienced, obviously.
Absolutely, yeah.
You're going to have a legal system that has, in very real terms, had to shape institutions. So, optimistically, this can be a very bright future for Ukraine.
Absolutely. And one of the areas on which we have focused has been helping with Ukraine with that process. And to a large extent, we have drawn Croatia into this. Croatia is the only EU country that has dealt with war crimes on its territory since the creation of the Union. And as Croatia was dealing with these war crimes investigations and prosecutions, they were also going through the EU accession process.
Right.
So it's an experience which is very instructive for Ukraine. We've facilitated a lot of exchanges there. And one of the first messages that the former Prosecutor General, former State Attorney of Croatia, told his Ukrainian counterparts is, when this decision was made in Brussels to give you candidate status, this was an incredible gift to you, because this allows you to make difficult decisions that might have been hard to sell politically otherwise. But it's important for your EU process. It's important about making a full embrace of rule of law. And it's tough to do these things, particularly as an ongoing conflict is going on. But to be able to say, this is part of our future, helps you, like I say, to do difficult things. For example, prosecuting Ukrainian soldiers who might have committed crimes against Russians, which the Ukrainians recognize they need to do too. They're very mindful of having the moral high ground. They don't want to lose that. And but being able to look at this from the longer term perspective and to incorporate what they're doing as a transitional step toward that ultimate goal is very important and something that they're keenly aware of.
I've been struck by, in my dealings with Ukrainians, that it's a combination of almost youthful exuberance and bravado, plus a level of maturity and strategic thinking that you don't often find together. But they really do have a notion of the immediate, but also the long term, and that's quite inspirational. I think that's quite inspirational.
It is, and I share that impression. They, I think, have handled this masterfully. There have been some missteps, as you would expect in any situation like this.
It is war.
It is war, yeah. But they've been minor ones, and one of my Ukrainian colleagues had this great quote, and I think that sort of sums this up. It said, when we elected Vladimir Zelensky as president, we thought we were getting Charlie Chaplin. He goes, instead we got Churchill. And it's you never know where you're going. And
Churchill, who has Zoom capabilities and able to connect with media back here, and that's it has changed the face of so many things. So, last questions. You've gotten the resources you need from the administration that seems very supportive and determined to carry this through?
Absolutely. The administration has been very supportive. There's been strong bipartisan support in Congress. I think you have some people on both the far right and the far left that are opposed to this, but they're really outliers. And all of the engagements I've had on the Hill, I testified along with the Prosecutor General of Ukraine before the House Foreign Affairs Committee. It's really striking how strong the support is, how widespread it is, and that's going to be critical for the long term. As I said, this is a marathon, not a sprint, and I think that's going to be one of the key challenges, is just making sure that level of engagement remains.
Well, and I'll just perhaps close with this. If we don't hold countries to account when they attack a sovereign state, why would they be held to account when it's disputed territory? And we all talk about the South China Sea and such. This is really where we draw a line on what is acceptable and what is unacceptable, it seems to me.
It is indeed. And just a quick anecdote, the Prosecutor General was here in Washington in January, and we did an event at Georgetown, and there were a number of students who were there. And the Prosecutor General was talking about how he's approached this in Ukraine. And this one student stood up during the questioning period and identified himself, and he said, "Mr. Prosecutor General, I'm from Taiwan. What advice would you give to our prosecutors to prepare for this eventuality?" It sent a chill down your spine.
Sure, of course.
I mean, it is, everybody's certainly cognizant of the threats there, the risks, and the importance of standing up to aggression here, lest it, facilitate it down the road. But to hear this come out of his mouth, as I said, was chilling. And
well, Godspeed. Thank you for what you're doing, and I think success in Ukraine makes for a more just world and hopefully a more peaceful world. Thank you, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Great.
Okay.